I'm speaking with Bob Eckstein. He's an illustrator and writer. He has such an impressive career. You can find his work at such places as The New Yorker, The New York Times, Playboy, GQ, National Lampoon. He also happens to be a Snowman expert, which we'll get into. His new book is Everyone's a Critic. Bob, thank you for doing this interview.
Hello, Henry.
Yes,
Great
hello.
to be on here.
I will start with my big high concept question, and we'll just take off from there. The title of the new book is Everyone's a Critic, and it's a collection of New Yorker cartoons, a new collection on the theme that everyone needs to be a critic, which sounds contemporary and yet so timeless, because I just looked this up, and everyone's a critic is attributed to an ancient Greek philosopher. Why do you think everyone needs to be a critic? We can start off with that. Do you think it helps us, or is it just to make us feel better?
I think you're right. People definitely feel better taking on that power, and I think it happened in this country with a series of events, and it kind of can be traced back to I think of the year it was that Facebook started, and at the same time Amazon started to be accepted to taking reviews. And I'm trying to think exactly what year this was. I want to say it's 2004. That it was the same year that Yelp showed up to, when you could actually rate your restaurant as well, and everyone started to feeling like they could be a critic. At the same time, a new TV show with Simon Cowell came out. I'm trying to think of the name. I'm sorry, it slipped my mind. America's Got Talent. And then everyone was sort of given a path that they could also be a critic.
Yeah.
It just started catching on that everyone can actually have a forum. And, of course, now we live in an age where you have all these formats that people can speak out, and we could all bitch and moan in mass numbers. And we could, instead we just complained about our next-door neighbor. Now we could complain about any establishment or anything, and it's really given us all this type of power. And then, by the way, that same year, around 2004, began another show called The Apprentice, which was another reality show, another person who has spoken out on Twitter and stuff. And so this is the age we live in now, where everyone is a critic.
Share with us some of these cartoons that are in this book. Is it a series? Because you've got the one that came out earlier this year, cartoons about books, and now you have the Everyone's a Critic. Not to jumble my question too much, but I guess what I'm getting at here is, could you give us a window into what makes for a really quintessential New Yorker cartoon? And maybe you can use, as an example, what's going on in Everyone's a Critic.
Well, let me explain that. On the surface, it's just a series of themes, but really the backstory is this. The first book came about because I wanted to do a thank you to independent bookstores. I had come out with a book on bookstores and their stories behind them, and collecting all these stories from famous people of how bookstores have changed our lives. And these bookstores I got very involved in. I got to know the owners, and I felt indebted to them, and they in turn gave me great support. The book became a Times bestseller. It's in multiple languages. And these stores were wondering what my next book was going to be. So I thought it would be nice to do a collection of cartoons about bookstores, so they would have a book that was about them. Like, they could joke about themselves and the experience of running a bookstore. And at the same time, it would give me a chance to sort of give back to a group of people I also felt was deserving of special attention, and that's gag cartoonists. It wasn't so much New Yorker. The New Yorker is not involved in the book or the series. It's simply this group of great gag cartoonists that I admired and was inspired by to become a gag cartoonist myself. So we did this book, and from the success of that book, the publisher, Princeton Architectural Press, asked if I would like to do a sequel. And we tossed around some ideas of what it could be, some themes. I wanted to do the meaning of life, we talked about doing like dogs and cats because we thought that would just be a popular thing. People like dogs and cats. And then we thought we could do something more meaty, more about society, something that felt like it would also be an evergreen as opposed to doing something political, but something that is on people's mind too, and that is, this new age we're in. And it's almost what I call an age of negativity. I actually wrote an op-ed by that title for the New York Daily News about this new age that we're in, that everyone is constantly judging and being negative. And so I thought it would be good to diffuse this hot subject by making fun of it, going back to the collaborators of the first book, and then asking them what they had on the subject. And again, it's not so much about the New Yorker. It's really nothing to do with the New Yorker per se, but the New Yorker does have some of the best cartoonists working for them, or used to. There's a new wave of cartoonists at the New Yorker, and they're not in my book. They're new, and it's a different type of sensibility and comedy that you see now in the magazine. I was giving sort of a nod to the people who were there before, people who I consider the real heavyweights, and people who I really look up to, such as Sam Gross, George Booth, Danny Shanahan, Raj Chaz, and other gag cartoonists who had done thousands of cartoons, but at the same time were losing a platform to share their cartoons. And that's because a lot of the venues have disappeared. I used to do cartoons for many different magazines, like about a dozen, like Barron's, Harvard Business Review, Mad Magazine, Playboy, National Lampoon. All these magazines are gone. And so I felt in a small way, my book provided another venue for them. And it's become a series now. We're already well into a third book as well.
Oh, great.
Well, thanks.
Well, you mentioned in an interview or on a presentation that things have happened in a series of happy accidents. And the Sam Gross connection, that has also to do with the Snowman book, doesn't it?
Exactly. I was not thinking of being a gag cartoonist when I was younger. It's something that just simply wasn't on my radar. I love humor. I love writing. And I did write for some different publications when I first started. And I had a column, I think it was New York Newsday, The Village Voice, Time Out New York, and there were other places too where I had a chance to write my humor. And I did do illustration, but I didn't do gag cartoons. That happened by accident. As I kept on writing for different publications, there was an opportunity presented to me to write a book. Publishers and agents asked me if I would come up with a book idea. And I wanted to do a mystery, but I wasn't sure exactly what. But I knew I didn't want to do a negative mystery. Negative meaning it wasn't going to be about murder, but instead it would be something positive, like one of life's great questions. And I stumbled upon who made the first snowman. And that began a quest, sort of a holy grail for me, of trying to find out when man first made snowmen. And I spent like 7 years doing that with the aid of a team of experts. It was like a dream team of people who were in the field of art and cultural history, like professors at different universities who knew the Middle Ages inside and out, art historians at different art institutes who were going to help me piece together when man first made snowman, which for me, their approach was that snowman making was like an early form of folk art. So that's how I approached it. It was sort of a mystery as who began this wave, this new type of art form, and could we prove that prehistoric man was responsible? And then we can talk about that if you want to more, but to get to your question, I'm sorry I went off on a tangent, but
no, it's fine.
Okay, so what happened was I knew that this book was a surprisingly academic book. Most people would consider it just a fluff subject, and I kind of unveiled all these dark stories of sex and violence. with these events that happened in its past, like the miracle of 1511 and the massacre of 1690. One of the bloodiest events in early American history was a Snowman story that was in the book. So I knew that I needed to lighten up a little bit, and I had an intermission. And in this intermission, I got the New Yorker cartoons in the middle, the funniest cartoons about snowmen. And through that, I met Sam Gross, and I was aware of Sam Gross's work, and I became a fan, and then we became friends. And then he took me out for my birthday to a New Yorker lunch, and I had dabbled a little bit in cartoons because I ran out of space in the book, because I ran out of money. I had filled in a bunch of cartoons from the New Yorker Cartoon Bank, and I had already spent about $22,000 on the book, with permission rights and expenses. It was a very expensive book, and this is back in 2007. Mm-hmm. Took me out to lunch. I had a good time. I remember I sat and met with Gaham Wilson, who unfortunately just passed away.
Yeah.
And Leo Cullum, and then Sam. And I said, could I come back? And then he kind of dared me and says, you could come back, but come back with a batch of cartoons. And that's what cartoonists call their group of cartoons that they're going to pitch the cartoon editor. They come back and they show Bob Mancroft, who was the editor at that time. They showed him like 10 or so cartoons to try to sell. And I did just that, and I got on this ride that took me on a whole different direction for years. And I had no idea what it was going to be like, but that's how I got into cartooning, just on that one dare. And I went in, and Sam introduced me to Bob, and you want me to explain the details?
Sure.
All right, because if people who are listening are like me, they're cartoon geeks, and they like all these little details about the backstories of getting into the New Yorker. I actually couldn't go the next week because I couldn't come up with 10 ideas. It was too difficult. Mm-hmm. It took me more. It took me like 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I think it was, before I could come up with 10 ideas to draw up. And I threw together as much stuff I could, learning as much as I could, and getting my hands on old New Yorkers and going through all their old cartoons and try to take a crash course in this gag cartooning thing that I wasn't totally familiar with. I had done the caption contest. I remember I entered that when I was in college, just as a goof, and I actually was picked runner-up. And at that time, it was just a once-a-year contest. And I remember it was Danny Shanahan's first. It was the first contest actually, and Danny Shanahan's cartoon with Quasimodo was in it, and I wrote something like "The Name Rings a Bell" or something like that, some silly, and I got runner-up. But then, and years passed before I got back to think about the New Yorker, and here we're at lunch, and I took up this challenge, and I went in there, and Sam introduced me to Bob Mancroft, and actually Bob wound up purchasing the first cartoon that I drew up, and it ran it. At the time, I really didn't think that much of it, because not having the background of the New Yorker and realizing the weight of the situation, I was kind of easygoing about it. And I also was not aware that the group of people that I was in the room with, in this waiting room at the New Yorker, I wasn't aware that outside that room there was many of a cartoonist submitting. Mm-hmm. I thought that was the whole staff. So when I sold one cartoon, I thought I assumed that I did the worst, and that each of the other people in the room had sold multiple cartoons that week. And so I was embarrassed, and I just figured, oh well, that's how you start, at least maybe I got, lucky getting one. But I was not like overjoyed or anything. I didn't realize it was a big deal. And then I realized how much it was beginner's luck, because it took me months before I sold the second cartoon, and I realized it was just a fluke, that it wasn't, anything. And I really learned a humble lesson of how difficult it was. And then I started talking with the other cartoonists, learning about how difficult it was to get in. And I know this sounds really stupid that I didn't know all this stuff, but I simply was coming from a different discipline. I was a writer, and I wasn't really in that world, and I really had to learn all my things as we went on. And that's my story.
but you had a pretty substantial illustration background, right? So
I did, but it was very separate to me. To me, illustration was like I was doing work for Sports Illustrated. I was doing political work for the newspapers. I didn't really tie it to the New Yorker. I wasn't thinking of it as gag cartoons. And I think most of the reason was that I admired and thought that those cartoons were so well done. I could never imagine that I would try those myself. I figured that was just a different skill set. That was, they all look so together and stuff.